Good evening. Tonight, we step softly into a world where snow crunches gently beneath your boots, and the horizon stretches endlessly as a frozen sweep of plains. The Wild West, usually painted in the warm dust of summer cattle drives and golden sunsets, could also be quiet and bitterly cold. You breathe in slowly, and your lungs take in air that feels sharp, almost like glass. The silence around you is heavy, broken only by the muffled groan of trees beneath their blanket of snow. It is beautiful, yes, but unforgiving. And here you are, alone on the frontier, facing the kind of winter that makes your fingertips ache, even through your gloves. You probably will not survive this without a decent shelter. That is the plain truth. So before you settle in too deeply, if you find yourself enjoying this quiet journey through history, feel free to subscribe, to like, and to share, but only if you wish. Now dim the lights, close your eyes if you like, and let the story carry you softly onward. You picture yourself arriving in late autumn. The grass is already frosted. The rivers are beginning to crust over with thin sheets of ice. There is no hotel waiting, no cabin ready with a fire flickering inside, just a canvas of wilderness stretching quietly before you. You glance at the sky and wonder, perhaps, if you have made a mistake. Perhaps you should have waited for spring, yet the promise of land or fortune has pushed you westward. And here you are, boots sinking gently into snow. Your first thought is simple: survival, a roof, 4 walls, something, anything to keep the wind out. Settlers like you face this moment constantly. Thousands arrived with wagons creaking slowly behind them, expecting to build their dream homesteads, only to find the clock ticking quietly down toward a deadly season. Some succeeded. Some froze before spring came, and you stand here now, replaying their quiet fears. The air smells of pine resin, sharp and almost medicinal. If you are lucky, there are trees close by. If not, you might be staring at flat prairie with nothing but tall grass, now lying flattened under snow. What do you do? Perhaps you have read that the pioneers sometimes dug hastily into the earth, creating what they called dugouts. It is hardly glamorous. But in this instant, with your breath already frosting your scarf, glamour is the last thing on your mind. The early settlers in these regions often learned from indigenous peoples who had been enduring these climates for centuries. They discovered that even in the harshest winter, shelter could be improvised from what lay at hand: earth, hides, wood, stone. Without those lessons, survival would have been nearly impossible. Yet you hear a quiet story whispered around the fire. Some desperate travelers supposedly survived by turning their overturned wagons into makeshift huts, tacking hides or quilts against the wheels. Imagine sleeping beneath a wagon bed, horses tied close for warmth, while snow drifted softly over the wheels. It sounds absurdly primitive, and yet it might have been the only way through a blizzard. The cold wraps around you gently but firmly. Your ears burn, your toes lose feeling. And suddenly you understand why every settlement, every story of frontier life begins with shelter. Without it, nothing else matters. Gold, cattle, land, freedom. It all disappears if you cannot wake up alive tomorrow. You hear the whistle of wind tunneling through bare branches, and you press your scarf tighter to your face. The land is so vast, the sky so endlessly grey. You feel small, almost swallowed, but you keep moving, dragging wood, shoveling earth, pulling hide from your wagon. Because tonight, you must have a wall between you and that quiet, cruel wind. You imagine the soft crackle of a fire, the glow of embers against stone, but here, in this frozen reality, you know it will start rougher. It will be clumsy, rushed, not beautiful. Yet, like the settlers before you, you promise yourself this: the winter may be long, but as long as you have walls, even crooked, drafty ones, you will endure. The Wild West greets you not with the romance of sunsets and open plains, but with the quiet demand of survival. And so, shivering gently, you take your first steps into the art of building warmth out of wilderness. You bend down slowly. Your hands are chilled, even through your gloves. You scoop a lump of earth. It crumbles softly, damp from the recent snowmelt, sticky enough to cling to your palms. You look around and notice something. The land itself might be your salvation. Grass roots grip soil into tough clumps. And suddenly, you understand why the old pioneers cut sod and stacked it into walls. A sod house may not be pretty, but in this vastness, beauty is not the point. Survival is. The prairie, stretching endlessly before you, hides its secret beneath that frozen blanket. The soil, held together by dense mats of roots, comes up in heavy slabs when cut with a spade. Each piece, thick and stubborn, feels almost like a brick. You line one next to another, imagining a wall taking shape, dark and earthen, thick enough to stand against the wind. You may never have thought dirt could feel like safety, but here, in the cold, it does. In the Great Plains, especially where trees were scarce, settlers relied heavily on sod houses, or soddies. Throughout the 19th century, entire families spent weeks stacking cut sod into walls a foot thick, then smoothing the inside with a plaster of mud or lime. Sod was plentiful, insulating, and free. It was the very ground under their feet, transformed quietly into shelter. Yet there is a gentle side to these earthy homes. Visitors sometimes joked that soddies sprouted grass on their roofs, giving the illusion that sheep could graze above, while people lived below. Imagine looking up from your supper table to see tufts of green waving softly from the ceiling. Not exactly the wallpaper you dreamed of, but practical enough. And mice loved those grassy ridges too, skittering gently across at night like tiny, uninvited guests. On one hand, sod houses leaked mud in rainstorms, smelled of damp earth, and harbored insects. On the other, they were cozy against wind, fireproof compared to timber cabins, and often the only thing standing between a family and frostbite. As you picture yourself stacking those sod bricks, you feel the weight of each one in your arms, damp, heavy, squishing slightly against your coat as you lift. The smell is rich, like wet hay mixed with clay, oddly comforting in its familiarity. You press one block down next to another, fitting them tight. The wall grows slowly, inch by inch. The rhythm is steady, meditative. The wind whistles outside, but inside this circle of walls, the sting dulls. You begin to sense the promise of warmth. The sound of your spade digging into frozen soil echoes across the plain, thudding softly, punctuated by your own quiet breaths. Each block you cut feels like a small victory over the cold, a piece of safety carved gently from the land. Your muscles ache, but the rhythm is hypnotic. Step, cut, lift, stack, step, cut, lift, stack. It becomes less of a chore and more of a mantra, a steady beat against the silence. Still, your mind drifts to the floors. You imagine waking in the night to find a small trickle of mud dripping slowly down the wall, spattering onto your quilt. You can almost hear the gentle groaning, and yet when dawn rises and the snow outside sparkles like crushed glass, you would smile, because you are still alive. The walls may weep softly, but they keep you breathing. You remember stories of settlers decorating sod interiors to soften the gloom. Curtains hung across dirt windows, colorful quilts tacked against raw earth. Even old newspapers pasted to walls like wallpaper. You picture the print curling gently in the damp. Headlines about distant cities, half dissolved by moisture. But still, a reminder of the world beyond the prairie. Strange comfort, but comfort nonetheless. The sod house hums with quiet life. In your imagination, the smell of wood smoke mingles with the damp earth scent of the walls. The firelight glows against earthen ridges, turning them golden, almost soft. You settle onto a rough bench, quilt wrapped tight, and listen. The wind outside sounds muffled now, like waves crashing far away instead of claws scratching at your skin. You lean back slowly and feel the cool, rough texture of the wall against your shoulder. It feels alive, almost pulsing with the land itself. The sod's insulation keeps the inside warm long after the fire dies down. A steady embrace from the soil that birthed it. You are grateful, even as a little dirt crumbles softly onto your sleeve. Gratitude is a powerful warmth of its own. Sometimes you imagine settlers quietly saying they lived in harmony with the earth, though in truth it was more desperation than philosophy. And yet, there is something humbling in knowing that when the prairie tried to kill them, they answered with the prairie itself. You look at your walls of sod and feel a quiet triumph. It may not last forever. Spring rains might melt them gently. Mice might gnaw through them, but for this winter they are yours. Your thoughts drift again, lazily now, to how these sod walls connect you to generations of survival. Every block you lay is a memory of someone else's struggle, someone else's determination not to let winter win. You can almost hear their voices, soft and muffled. Men, women, children cutting, stacking, patching. Their laughter muted, their curses quiet, but their will to endure always strong. The fire crackles gently, the walls hold. And as you close your eyes, you realize dirt has never felt so noble. The sod may crumble one day. Grass may sprout softly from the roof. Mice may skitter in the corners. But tonight, it is a fortress against the endless cold. And for now, that is enough. You stand at the edge of a forest now, boots crunching softly over frosted needles. And your breath curls like smoke into the cold. Behind you stretches the open prairie, with its fragile soddies and dugouts. But here, among the trees, another kind of shelter whispers to you. Logs, solid, straight, unyielding. Timber offers more than dirt ever could. It promises strength, height, and permanence. You step closer, running your gloved hand gently over the rough bark of a pine. And already, you picture it lying across another, interlocked into a square. A log cabin. The first settlers who stumbled into wooded regions of the West saw these towering trees not just as shade or firewood, but as walls, roofs, and entire lives waiting to be built. Log cabins were among the most iconic forms of pioneer housing. Their roots stretched back to Scandinavian and Eastern European building traditions, brought over by immigrants who knew precisely how to fit one log snugly atop another. A properly built cabin, they said, could hold heat like a sealed chest and keep out even the fiercest winter storm. But there is a gentle tidbit that always tickles the imagination. Some cabins were supposedly built so hastily that settlers did not even bother to peel the bark off the logs. You can picture it. Walls lined with shaggy bark. Insects burrowed deep within. The whole place scratching softly and crackling like a giant animal in the night. Guests might have laughed nervously, wondering if the house itself would crawl away on legs made of pine beetles. Still, when you are shivering in a snowstorm, bark becomes just another layer of insulation. Without constant patching, cabins could be as drafty as caves. You heft an axe in your mind, its blade gleaming faintly in the pale light. The air carries the sweet, sharp scent of pine. The first strike echoes softly, a deep, resonant thud that vibrates through your arms. Chips of wood fly gently, each stroke a rhythm that warms you despite the chill. Thud, crack, gasp, thud, crack, gasp. It is back-breaking work, but also hypnotic. You feel like you are carving time itself, shaping the hours into something tangible. When the tree finally groans, shivers, and crashes slowly to the ground, the sound rumbles through the forest, startling birds into sudden flight. You rest your forehead gently against the haft of the axe, sweat cooling quickly in the wind. One tree down, dozens to go. A cabin is not just a shelter, it is a forest, transformed into home. You drag the log slowly, boots slipping on icy ground, and imagine stacking it atop another. The corners notch neatly, one crossing the other like fingers clasped in prayer. You press mud gently into the seams, stuffing moss into the cracks, feeling the cold seep away. The wall grows higher, enclosing you in a cocoon of wood. Already you hear the future crackle of fire bouncing softly from the surfaces. The scent of pine mingling with smoke, the low groan of wood adjusting as it settles into place. Inside such a cabin, the atmosphere is close, intimate. The wooden walls smell faintly of resin and damp earth. And when the fire burns, the scent deepens into something sweet, almost syrupy. Your hand trails gently along the grain of the log, smooth in some places, jagged in others. Each imperfection is a fingerprint of the forest, now sheltering you. But cabins were not without their troubles. Imagine lying in bed and hearing tiny scratches inside the logs. Mice finding their way through cracks. Insects waking from their wooden burrows. Some diaries mention settlers waking to find frost on the inside walls, sparkling faintly in the firelight. You shiver gently, pulling the quilt tighter, marveling that even solid wood sometimes failed against the vast cold. Still, The log cabin represented something deeper than shelter. It was a claim, a stake in the wilderness, proof that you were not just passing through, that you belonged. Neighbors might come help raise the walls, their laughter echoing gently in the trees as logs were hoisted and dropped into place. Each thud of wood was a promise. We will survive here. Your imagination lingers on one such raising. The sound of men's boots crunching softly, women's skirts swishing, children chasing each other quietly between stumps. Someone passes around a jug of cider, the steam of hot stew rising gently from a nearby fire. Laughter competes softly with the sound of saws biting wood. The air feels warmer, even though the snow still falls. Because together they are building something lasting. At night, when the roof finally rests atop the cabin, you step inside. The fire blazes gently in the stone hearth, its glow licking across the rough log walls. Shadows dance, flicker, bend. The wind howls outside, rattling branches. But in here it becomes a faint, distant murmur. You run your hands across the walls and feel their solidity. No mud dripping, no crumbling sod, just timber standing proud. You lie down on a rough straw mattress, quilt tucked tight, and listen to the fire crackle softly. Your body relaxes in a way it has not since stepping onto this frozen land. Even as you drift towards sleep, a thought lingers gently. This cabin, like the sod house, is not perfect. It creaks softly, it leaks smoke, it needs constant repair. But here in the Wild West, perfection is not the goal. Survival is. And with each notch of wood, each crack stuffed gently with moss, you edge closer to spring. Your eyelids grow heavy, the fire sighs low, embers glowing faintly. Beyond the walls, wolves may howl, winds may lash, snow may pile softly against the door, but inside the warmth holds. You are wrapped not just in quilts, but in the strength of trees, in the patience of hands, in the stubborn will of those who refuse to let winter win, and as you drift off, you smile gently. Because the cabin is more than shelter, it is defiance, carved in wood. The forest slowly thins, and once more, you find yourself on the edge of open land. Out here, trees are fewer. But settlers do not simply give up when timber runs short. You glance at your wagon. Canvas stretched across bent ribs of wood, the fabric already stiff from frost. For many, this flimsy sheet was the very first roof they had in the wilderness. Intent against a western winter feels almost laughable. Yet thousands began this way. Families traveled with little more than wagons and cloth. So they stretched what they had. At first, it was a temporary measure, set up for a few nights, a week at most. But in the face of an early storm, those canvas walls often became a lifeline, giving pioneers precious time before sturdier construction could rise. And there is a curious account that drifts through memory. Travelers sometimes lined the inside of their tents with newspaper pages, pasting them up gently with flour paste to block the wind. Imagine falling asleep with headlines staring down at you, the ink smudging softly in the damp. The paper did not just block drafts, it reminded families that a wider world still existed, buzzing quietly with news they had left far behind. Picture yourself crawling gently into one of these tents. The canvas walls billow slightly in the wind, a low, flat flap that keeps rhythm softly with your heartbeat. The smell is sharp, tired fabric mixed with the smoke of a struggling fire. You brush your hand along the fabric and feel the rough weave, stiff and unyielding against your fingers. Light seeps through in pale, ghostly streaks. It is both claustrophobic and fragile. A reminder of just how thin the line between survival and exposure can be. Your breath fogs the air inside, rising in faint wisps that catch the firelight. The little stove in the corner crackles gently, glowing faintly red. Its thin chimney pipe poking through the tent's crown. Every few minutes you rise, feed it another stick of wood, then settle again under your quilt. Sleep never comes easily. The cold presses too close, too insistent, but still the canvas holds. You imagine yourself outside in the wind, canvas creaking softly, snow hissing as it strikes taut cloth. The air smells of pine smoke carried gently on the gale. Inside, the faintest warmth lingers, enough to keep fingers from going numb. You whisper thanks for even this thin barrier, because without it, you would be just another body stiffening under the stars. Over time, settlers realized these tents could evolve. Timber was scavenged, rough poles set as frames. Planks leaned gently against the sides. The canvas became a skin stretched tight over a skeleton of wood. Each layer added a little more defense, until one day the cloth was replaced entirely by boards. A shack, then a cabin grew slowly where once only a flapping tent stood. The process itself felt like breathing life into the wilderness. Each nail hammered gently, each board set against the wind, each patch of mud plastered softly against gaps, turned the fragile into the formidable. Families would sometimes leave the canvas hanging inside the finished cabin as an inner lining, a reminder of the tent that carried them through their first bitter nights. Imagine sitting at a wooden table, running your fingers across the wall, and still feeling the old fabric hidden beneath. There is an almost musical rhythm in your memory of that transformation. The pounding of hammers, soft but steady. The squeak of leather harness as oxen dragged logs. The sigh of canvas settling over wood. At night, you hear coyotes yipping gently beyond the firelight, but you pull the canvas flap closed. And inside it feels like another world. A fragile one, yes, but yours. The human senses cling to details in such fragile dwellings. The glow of embers painting shadows softly across fabric. The faint, sweet smell of dried grass stuffed between ground and tent to block drafts. The constant hiss of wind outside, muffled only slightly by stretched cloth. And the sound of your own breath. Steady, stubborn, proof that you are still here. There is something humbling in knowing that generations passed their first winters in nothing more than canvas, patched gently and reinforced as best as they could. It was not grand, it was not permanent, but it was enough to get them to the next season. Enough to turn despair gently into determination. Enough to bridge the gap between dream and reality. When you picture yourself now seated inside one of those makeshift shelters, you feel both vulnerable and defiant. Vulnerable because you know how thin the barrier truly is. Defiant because even so, it stands. The cold has not yet claimed you. And as long as the canvas quivers softly above your head and the fire flickers at your feet, you know you have beaten back the night. Your eyes grow heavy, lulled gently by the constant rustle of cloth and the faint warmth of flame. Outside, snow falls steady, blanketing the world in silence. Inside, your heart slows, your body loosens. You know tomorrow you will wake, drag wood, patch holes, and dream of boards replacing fabric. But tonight, this fragile cocoon of canvas is enough to hold the darkness back. The tent fades from your memory, and you step forward into a clearing where something sturdier glows faintly against the dusk. A hearth, a pile of river stones carefully stacked into a low wall, their surfaces blackened gently by smoke. You crouch slowly, run your fingers over the rough grit, and feel the echo of heat long since faded. A home without a fire is only a box, but a hearth turns four walls into a living refuge. On the western frontier, a fireplace was often the very first thing built. Before windows, before floors, even before a proper roof. Families stacked stones gently into a hearth and chimney. With it came not only warmth, but a place to cook, to gather, and to imagine that the wilderness could become home. Without fire contained, settlers might as well have been camping in the snow. An odd little detail sometimes emerges in travelers' letters. People occasionally used stones pulled directly from creek beds, unaware that when heated too quickly, the trapped moisture inside could make them explode. Picture sitting peacefully by the fire, only for a river rock to burst with a sharp crack, scattering embers across the floor. Some pioneers joked nervously about rock grenades, but the risk did not stop them from hauling buckets of smooth stone up from the river. It was simply too convenient. You kneel closer, in imagination, feeding dry twigs gently into the mouth of the fireplace. The air inside is frigid until the first spark catches. Then slowly, a faint crackle begins. The smell of resinous pine smoke curls upward, sharp and sweet. Sparks pop like miniature fireworks, and you lean back, mesmerized. Soon, larger logs hiss softly as they burn, filling the cabin with warmth that seeps gently into your chilled bones. The sensory world of a frontier hearth was intoxicating. The glow of firelight painted golden ripples across log walls. Shadows swayed and bowed gently with every flicker, turning rough rooms into places of quiet drama. The crackle was steady, hypnotic, like a lullaby sung in wood and flame. The heat pressed forward, soft at first, then heavy, until frost on the inside walls melted gently into thin rivulets. And then there was the taste. Pots dangled from iron hooks, hissing as stews bubbled within. Bread baked in cast-iron Dutch ovens, filling the air with warmth more comforting than quilts. You break off a crust in your imagination, steam rising gently against your face, and realize the hearth was not only about warmth of body, but warmth of spirit. Families laughed, argued, prayed, all within arm's reach of the fire. Of course, danger lingered constantly. Chimneys cracked, sparks leapt, roofs caught. Children were warned not to wander too near. Yet they always did, drawn gently by the flicker of flame. Some cabins built clay and stick chimneys that collapsed in storms, leaving families scrambling to rebuild in the snow. Others lined hearths with iron plates scavenged from broken stoves, anything to keep the fire contained. The Wild West was never forgiving, even in the comfort of one's own home. Imagine the rhythm of a winter's evening here. The wind howls outside, rattling shutters and hissing through the cracks. Inside, the hearth roars with defiance. Someone stirs a pot, the spoon clinking gently against iron. Children whisper in corners, quilts pulled tight, their faces glowing red in the firelight. Adults lean closer to one another, talking in low voices, the flames painting their eyes with reflection. The fire becomes more than heat, it becomes the heartbeat of the house. The texture of life settles around you. The smell of singed wool where a blanket brushed too close to sparks. The faint grit of ash underfoot, tracked in by boots. The soft sigh of a log shifting gently as it burns, sending a shower of sparks into the flue. The world outside may be white and lifeless, but here, within stone and flame, life pulses warmly. You think about how settlers marked time by the fire. They woke at dawn to coax embers gently back into flame, spent evenings feeding logs until they dared to sleep, and measured the passing of hours by how far the coals had fallen. There is something almost meditative about this rhythm, a surrender to the dance of flame. It made the wilderness feel less infinite, less indifferent. Even as your mind drifts, you remember stories of hearths glowing so hot that families claimed they forgot it was winter. Perhaps it was exaggeration, perhaps not. Either way, the stone hearth carried them through storms that howled for days, through nights when wolves prowled near the door, through months when snow buried roofs. It was a fragile miracle built from rocks and sweat, but it worked. And as you lean back now, eyes heavy, the fire still glows steady in your imagination. Sparks drift upward, vanishing gently into the chimney. The stones radiate quiet heat, the kind that lingers long after flames fade. Your body loosens, your breath slows. Beyond the walls, the cold remains merciless. But here, before the hearth, you have found not just warmth, but something like peace. The hearth's glow softens into embers in your mind, and you step back out into the icy air. Snow drifts higher around your boots now, muffling every sound except the crunch of your own steps. You glance at the cabin wall beside you and notice something peculiar. Snow packed thick against its base. At first you think it is just the storm's doing, but then you realize this was deliberate. The settlers discovered that snow, ironically enough, could be used as insulation. Snow is a surprisingly effective barrier against cold. As strange as it seems, the trapped pockets of air within packed snow actually keep heat from escaping. That is why igloos, built by Arctic peoples for generations, could remain comfortably above freezing, even in brutal temperatures. On the western frontier, families soon learned the same principle, banking snow gently against the sides of cabins and soddies to block the wind's icy fingers. One curious story, told in homesteaders' letters, recalls children being given the chore of snow chinking. While adults mended walls with clay or moss, the youngsters shoveled snow right up against gaps. They turned it into a game, piling it as high as they could, until cabins looked half swallowed by drifts. The work kept them warm through movement, and the result made the inside far cozier. Imagine yourself stepping outside into a storm, shovel in hand, and deliberately piling snow against your own home. The wind whips gently at your face. Snowflakes sting your eyes, but each shovel pressed against the wall feels like a defense. The sound is muffled, a dull, hollow thud of shovel meeting drift, followed by the gentle sigh of powder settling. Your fingers ache, but you keep working, because you know that this wall of snow will hold the warmth inside where you need it most. When you return indoors, the difference is immediate. The wind no longer whistles through cracks quite as sharply. The air feels heavier, more stable. It is still cold, but less biting, less cruel. You brush snowflakes gently from your shoulders, stomp the drifts off your boots, and settle by the fire, grateful for the strange protection given by the very element you feared. The sensory details deepen. You can smell the faint dampness where snow presses against wood, the musty scent of earth mingling with icy freshness. You touch the wall inside, expecting cold, but it feels almost neutral. The snow outside insulating more than freezing. You hear silence, thick and padded, as if the whole world has been wrapped in wool. Even the storm's howl sounds distant now, muted by your own handmade fortress of white. Of course, risks came with this method. Too much snow piled on a roof could collapse it, packed too tightly against poorly built walls. Moisture might seep in and rot wood come spring. Families balanced on a thin line between protection and disaster. And yet, when temperatures plunged, they often had no choice. Survival meant improvisation. Even if the cure carried its own risks, in your mind's eye, you picture children laughing as they shovel, unaware of the danger. Their cheeks glow red. Their breaths puff like little chimneys, and their giggles echo strangely in the muffled air. For them, it is play. For the parents watching from the doorway, it is insurance against death. The contrast lingers with you. Snowball fights blending into life or death engineering. Sometimes, neighbors would even compete, boasting about who could bury their home deeper in drifts. A visitor might stumble into a settlement and see nothing but a line of rooftops poking above white hills, smoke rising in lazy curls. Inside those snow-wrapped homes, families sat snug, their windows frosted into lace patterns, their breath invisible in the thicker warmth. The quiet in such moments must have been profound. No creak of trees, no call of birds, no distant river. Only the crackle of the hearth and the occasional drip where melting snow seeped through. The cold world outside was silenced, transformed into insulation. And inside, life continued in a cocoon of strange comfort. You lean back and close your eyes. The memory of snow pressing close feels heavy but secure, like an embrace from the land itself. It is not hostile in this moment. It is helpful, protective, paradoxically gentle. You hear nothing but your own breath, steady and slow, and the faint heartbeat of a fire that never seems to go out. Tomorrow, perhaps the snow will shift, the wind will rise, the walls will groan. But tonight, you let yourself trust in the white barrier you have built. You sigh, sinking deeper into quilts, and let the muffled silence cradle you gently towards sleep. The muffled silence of snow gives way to another memory, the smell of leather and musk, the feel of thick fur beneath your hand. You stand inside a shelter not made of wood or sod, but of hides, dark and supple, stretched tightly across a frame. Buffalo hides, stitched together with sinew, turned into walls that seem to breathe warmth back at their makers. Both indigenous peoples and later settlers relied heavily on buffalo hides for winter coverings. These hides were not just blankets, but architectural materials, pinned across doorways, draped over roofs, or stretched over wooden poles to form whole shelters. When properly cured, buffalo hide was dense, resistant to wind, and astonishingly good at holding heat. One strange little anecdote drifts through oral history. Families sometimes layered multiple hides with dried grass, or even old newspapers, sandwiched in between, creating what might have been the frontier version of insulation panels. Imagine running your hand gently over such a wall, soft on the outside, but thick, lumpy, and oddly warm to the touch. You picture yourself stepping into such a hide-draped shelter. The doorway hangs heavy with a flap of fur, brushing your shoulders gently as you duck inside. At once, the air changes. Outside, the wind screamed across the plains. Inside, it is hushed, warmer, and perfumed faintly with smoke and the lingering animal scent of leather. You kneel down and touch the wall. The surface is cool but pliable, and it seems to trap the fire's heat, sending it back into the room in gentle waves. The fire burns low in the center, its glow reflecting against the hides, making them shine with an oily sheen. Shadows ripple across the curved walls, soft and undulating, like the inside of a living creature. The crackle of flame feels closer here, more intimate, amplified by the enclosed space. Each sound echoes faintly, a reminder that this shelter is less rigid than logs or stone, more like a skin stretched across the bones of earth. You breathe deeply, the air tastes of smoke and fur, a mixture that clings to your throat but comforts you all the same. The quilts spread on the floor feel softer, warmer, heavier than before. You realize that every part of the buffalo has gone to use. The hides as walls, the bones as tools, the sinew as thread. Nothing is wasted. It is a kind of respect for survival, a truth that settlers slowly learned from tribes who had long understood this land. Yet there are inconveniences too. Rain could soak into hides, making them sag. Freezing temperatures stiffened them like boards, difficult to move. And when the wind rose high, the walls rippled, groaned, even threatened to tear. Imagine lying awake at night, listening to the fabric strain and snap, half believing the shelter itself might fly away. Still, compared to the cutting wind outside, the uncertainty of hides was worth the gamble. The daily life inside these hide-covered spaces was rich in sensory detail. Children played near the fire, their laughter echoing softly. Women stitched and mended the seams with careful fingers, their needles glinting in firelight. Men hung meat strips from poles above, letting smoke cure them. The scent of cooking mingled with the constant leather musk, wrapping the air in layers of survival. Sometimes a gust outside made the walls tremble, and ashes scattered gently from the fire. You imagine pulling a hide tighter across the door, weighing it with stones and settling back down with a sigh. It is not a palace. It leaks, it sways, it smells, but it holds the cold at bay, and that is enough to feel grateful. Stories tell of travelers who stepped into such dwellings and felt overwhelmed by the closeness. The way heat gathered quickly, the way every voice sounded louder, the way smoke lingered low. Some complained, some praised it, but all admitted the same thing. Stepping back into the wind afterward felt like being slapped by knives. The hide house, for all its flaws, was a sanctuary. As you sit now in imagination, wrapped in a quilt, the fire glowing, the hides shifting gently like breathing lungs, you feel lulled into stillness. The walls seem alive, protective, almost maternal in their embrace. Beyond them, wolves may howl. Snow may drift, winds may lash. Inside, you are cocooned in the gifts of the great animal that once roamed these plains in thundering herds. You close your eyes and think about that. How survival on the frontier was not just about ingenuity, but about borrowing from the land and from those who had lived with it for centuries. The hides remind you that nothing here was wasted, and everything carried the weight of life given for life preserved. Your body loosens, the fire pops softly, the hide walls sigh with the wind's pressure, and in that half-dreaming moment, you understand why settlers, for all their hardship, sometimes spoke of winter nights as almost tender, when the world shrank to a circle of warmth, fur, and flame, and the wilderness pressed close but did not conquer. The faint, animal scent of hides lingers in your imagination as you step onward into a valley where the land itself offers a different gift. The soil here is red and thick, sticky when damp, almost like clay between your fingers. You kneel, scoop up a handful, and feel its weight. Dense, malleable, and waiting to be shaped. Adobe. Out on the far edges of the West, settlers learned to mold the very earth into bricks, crafting homes that trapped the day's warmth and released it slowly through the bitter nights. Adobe had been used for centuries before Europeans ever came westward. Pueblo peoples built multi-story complexes of clay and straw long before pioneers stumbled into the deserts. When settlers found themselves in those same climates, hot by day, freezing by night, they adapted the technique, molding bricks from clay mixed with straw, then drying them in the sun. These bricks, stacked and plastered, made walls that could outlast timber and resist flames. all while keeping interiors astonishingly temperate. Strangely enough, there are accounts of people adding unusual ingredients to their adobe mix. Everything from animal hair to ground cactus pulp. Even horse manure. Each addition gave the bricks a slightly different strength or flexibility. Imagine yourself stirring a pit of mud with straw and cactus pads, laughing nervously at the mess, but knowing it will soon become a wall thick enough to withstand a blizzard. Of course, adobe could also feel claustrophobic. With no tall windows and thick walls, light was scarce. Smoke from poorly vented fires might linger, stinging your eyes. In deep winter, you might find yourself longing for a creak of wood, the sight of snow, anything but endless brown walls. Yet still, when dawn rose and you opened the door to find snow piled high, you thanked those walls for keeping you warm. The adobe home stands as both a borrowed wisdom and an adaptation, a dialogue between old traditions and new settlers. As you sit inside one now in your imagination, the fire glowing faintly against clay, you feel yourself becoming part of that dialogue. Your breath warms the room. Your footsteps echo softly. Your presence itself adds another layer to walls that have endured for centuries. Your eyes grow heavy again. The clay radiates a slow warmth, the kind that seeps into your bones and stays. You lie back, cheek against the cool plaster, quilt pulled tight, and listen. Outside, the night rages cold. Inside, the earth holds you gently. You drift, comforted by the paradox. That soil, fragile underfoot, could be reshaped into strength enough to guard your dreams. You leave behind the sun-baked adobe walls in your mind's eye and wander northward into a harsher landscape. Here, the prairie rises into hills, and the wind howls over them like a wolf. Trees are scarce, stones are few, and snow sweeps freely across the land. In such places, settlers discovered another way to survive. They dug into the very hillsides, carving homes straight from the earth. These were dugouts, half burrow, half house, the most primitive of shelters, and yet sometimes the most enduring. Dugouts were common where timber was absent, particularly across the Great Plains. Families drove their wagons into a bank or hillside, cut into the slope with shovels, and fashioned a front wall from sod or wood. Roofs were made from whatever lay at hand: brush, poles, sod, even wagon boards. It was not glamorous, but the earth provided thick insulation. In winter, dugouts often stayed warmer than the flimsy cabins above ground. One odd note preserved in diaries is that dugouts often sprouted wildflowers on their roofs come spring. Because the top layer was sod, grass and flowers kept growing. So it was said a dugout could look like nothing more than a meadow with a door in it. Imagine approaching your own home and finding daisies waving cheerfully from the roof, disguising the fact that a family huddled beneath. You take up a shovel in your imagination and begin digging into a frozen hillside. Each strike echoes with a dull thud. The soil hard as stone. Your breath steams, your muscles ache. But slowly, a hollow begins to form. You drag out clumps of dirt, boots slipping on the icy slope, until the space feels large enough to stand inside. The air smells rich, damp earth, sharp and mineral. Cold seeps from the soil, but the wind is gone. Already you sense the difference. A sod wall rises at the front, rough and uneven. You press sod blocks into place, stacking them thick until only a crude doorway remains. Overhead you lay brush, then poles, then sod again. The roof sags, but it holds. You step inside and duck low, the ceiling just above your head. Light filters faintly through cracks, and you patch them with mud. The silence settles heavy. You have made a burrow, a cave, a home. Inside, the sensations are unique. The walls feel damp, gritty under your palm. But the air is still. The smell of soil mixes with the faint sweetness of smoke from your fire. You spread straw across the floor, and it rustles underfoot. The sound is soft, muffled, nothing like the creak of timber. You light a small fire near the entrance, and smoke coils uncertainly upward, escaping through a crude flue. Your eyes water, but the warmth builds. Families who lived in dugouts often recalled the closeness. Ceiling beams dripped with condensation, sometimes dropping onto quilts in the night. Mice scurried through the straw. Snakes occasionally slithered in, seeking warmth. You imagine lying awake, hearing the faint hiss of scales over straw, pulling the blanket tighter in fear. Yet still, in the worst storms, dugouts did their job. They kept people alive. You picture the process now, step by step. First, clay and straw are stomped together in shallow pits, your boots squelching as you grind fibers into mud. The smell is earthy, sharp with wet straw, and oddly sweet in the warmth of the sun. Then wooden molds are set down, rectangles pressed into the mix, each one filled and smoothed. Hours later, the bricks are lifted carefully to dry in rows, sun-baked into firmness. You can hear the faint crackle as they shrink, the whisper of straw fibers holding them together. When stacked into walls, the adobe feels cool to your fingertips. The texture is sandy, a little rough, almost chalky. Inside such a home, the air is still, heavy with the faint scent of clay. At night, when frost settles outside, the walls seem to breathe out the day's stored heat, warming the small room slowly, steadily. You curl up in a corner, quilt around your shoulders, and marvel that earth itself has become a kind of thermal blanket. Yet adobe brought challenges too. Heavy rains could erode walls if they were not carefully plastered. Settlers often smeared them with more mud or lime wash to keep the water out, but storms always threatened collapse. Imagine lying awake while thunder rolls and rain hammers the roof, praying the walls will not melt into sludge around you. A comfort and a curse all at once. Daily life within adobe houses was rich in sensory rhythm. The soft light filtered in through tiny windows, bouncing golden off the clay walls. The floor beneath your feet felt cool, even in summer. The air smelled faintly of earth and smoke, blending into something grounding, something steady. You could run your hand along the wall and feel the grooves where straw peeked through, a reminder that these were not factory bricks, but handmade, imprinted with the sweat of survival. Families found creative ways to decorate these earthen interiors. Some whitewashed walls until they gleamed bright against the firelight. Others painted them with simple colors, red or blue, turning the clay canvas into art. And many simply embraced the plainness, seeing beauty in the honest texture of soil shaped into a home. Neighbors might gather inside one adobe dwelling on a stormy night, huddled around the hearth. The thick walls muted the wind so thoroughly that conversation felt private, cocooned. The sound of rain outside became a distant patter, while inside, voices rose soft and warm. You picture children chasing one another in circles, their laughter bouncing faintly in the clay chamber. The walls, unyielding, trapped every sound, turning the house itself into an echo chamber of life. There is a comfort here that differs from wood or hides. Wood creaks and shifts, hides ripple and flap. But adobe is solid, silent. You lean against it and feel unmoving strength, as if the earth itself has wrapped you in its arms. That steadiness calms you, makes your shoulders drop, your breath deepen. It is as if the land has decided for once not to fight you, but to hold you steady through the long winter night. Neighbors would sometimes joke that prairie families lived in cellars without houses above them. Yet gatherings inside could be lively. You picture a storm raging outside, wind shrieking across the open land. Inside, lamplight flickers against damp earthen walls. Children sit cross-legged telling stories. Adults sip weak coffee, their voices echoing softly. The dugout may look miserable from outside, but within, it becomes a womb of sound and warmth. When spring comes, the dugout changes. The roof sprouts grass, even flowers. Birds land overhead, pecking at seeds. You step outside and laugh at the sight. A house disguised as a meadow. Visitors have to be shown the door, otherwise they would walk right past, assuming the slope hides nothing more than rabbits. And yet danger always lingers. Heavy rains might collapse the roof. Flash floods could drown the hollow. The damp encouraged mold, which settled in lungs. Still, many families lived entire years in dugouts, raising children in earthen-walled rooms, cooking meals over smoky fires, sleeping beneath sod ceilings. Diaries note children remembering these homes with surprising fondness, recalling the coziness, even amid hardship. As you rest in your imagined dugout, quilt pulled tight, the earth walls close around you like a heavy blanket. The silence is deep. broken only by the fire's sigh and the occasional drip from the roof. Your body relaxes despite the damp, because the wind outside cannot touch you here. For a time, you belong to the earth, and the earth keeps you safe. You drift in thought, marveling at the paradox, that the same soil meant for planting and burial also became refuge. Dugouts were crude, perhaps undignified, yet they whispered a truth. Sometimes, the simplest hole in the ground is all that stands between life and death on the frontier. And as you close your eyes, lulled by the muffled quiet, you accept that truth, grateful for its embrace. The earthen dugout fades behind you, and you step into a place far less quiet, far less solitary. The sound reaches your ears first, a hammer striking metal, boots thudding against boards, voices calling over one another. You have wandered into a railroad shantytown, one of those makeshift settlements that sprouted like mushrooms along the growing tracks of the West. Here, survival in winter was less about permanence and more about improvisation. Wherever rail lines stretched, small temporary towns sprang up to houseworkers. They were thrown together quickly, often with scrap lumber from supply depots, sheets of tar paper, and salvaged canvas. No one expected them to last, yet men and their families huddled within them through brutal winters. The roofs sagged, the walls rattled. But they were shelters of necessity, erected in days rather than weeks. A peculiar detail that appears in workers' accounts is the use of railroad materials themselves as building supplies. Discarded ties became beams, while bent rails were sometimes hammered into door frames or even used as makeshift anchors for walls. Imagine sleeping in a shack where your bed leaned against an iron rail, once destined for the main line. It was both absurd and resourceful. Proof that nothing went to waste when survival was at stake. You step into one of these rough shacks now in your mind. The walls are thin, patched together with uneven boards. Tar paper flaps loosely, its edges crackling in the wind. A lantern swings from a bent nail, its flame trembling against the draft. The air smells of kerosene, tar, and the faint sour tang of damp wood. Every creak and groan reminds you that this structure is temporary, barely standing, yet it shelters you from the icy gale. The floor crunches under your boots, a scattering of sawdust and frozen mud. Straw lies in the corners, stuffed into gaps to block the cold. You run your hand along the wall and feel the tar paper, brittle and waxy under your fingers, almost peeling away in strips. The wind outside pushes hard, rattling the shack, but the boards hold for now. Inside, life presses close. Men sit shoulder to shoulder on rough benches, their breath steaming in the air. Someone plays a fiddle. The tune scratchy but spirited, echoing oddly in the cramped space. A pot of beans bubbles over a small iron stove, its lid rattling with every gust. The smell fills the shack, earthy and comforting, though smoke lingers low, making your eyes sting. You imagine the clamor of voices. Workers swap stories, boasting about how many ties they have laid, or cursing the foreman in low growls. Laughter rises, followed by a hacking cough, the sound of someone pouring coffee into a dented tin cup. Children scurry between legs, their laughter bright, though they too shiver under patched coats. The noise is constant, alive, the very opposite of the muffled silence you left in the dugout. Yet danger lives in these walls. Fires break out easily when stoves tip or lanterns spill. Illness spreads quickly in the crowded air. And when the wind turns fierce, whole shacks have been known to collapse, their flimsy boards giving way under snow. Still, workers rebuild, nailing boards back together, hammering tar paper flat. Because trains must keep running, and people must keep warm. Outside, the scene is just as vivid. Rows of shanties lean against one another, roofs patched with whatever was at hand. Tin sheets, blankets, even canvas painted with tar. Smoke rises in uneven plumes. The air carries the constant clang of hammers, the whistle of distant trains, the crunch of boots in snow. Dogs bark. Horses whinny. Children shout, all blending into a ragged symphony of survival. At night, the whole settlement seems to glow faintly, lantern light leaking from cracks and flapping seams. From a distance, it might look fragile, pitiful. But step inside, and you feel the fierce determination. These walls, however crude, hold the night at bay. Your senses soak in every detail. The bitter tang of smoke clinging to your clothes, the constant draft sneaking through cracks, brushing your cheeks like icy fingers, the warmth of bodies pressed close, each breath adding to the small cloud of shared heat, the rattle of the shack in the wind, at once frightening and reassuring. You are reminded that survival is not always elegant. It is often noisy, crowded, patched together with whatever scraps lie nearest. Tomorrow, some of these men will leave, moving further down the line. New shacks will rise, just as crude, just as fragile. This town may vanish, its boards scattered, its tar paper burned or buried in snow. But tonight, you sit inside one. Quilt pulled around your shoulders, lanterns swaying above, listening to the fiddle and the wind. The shanty town embodies both the hardship and the strange warmth of community. Alone, the cold might kill you. Together, even in flimsy walls, you endure. And as your eyes drift shut, rocked gently by the rattle of boards, you understand that sometimes survival is less about what you build, and more about who you build beside. The clamor of the shanty town fades from your ears, replaced by the steady cadence of boots on packed snow, and the crisp snap of a flag in the wind. You have reached a frontier fort, its silhouette stark against the pale horizon. Square walls of timber rise high, watchtowers jutting from the corners, gates creaking as they open to admit you. Unlike the soddy or the dugout, this place was built with intent, not just to shelter a family, but to guard whole groups through the winter. Forts dotted the western frontier, serving both as defensive outposts and community centers. Their structures were more durable than the scattered cabins of homesteaders, often combining timber palisades with stone foundations. Within their walls stood barracks, storehouses, blacksmith shops, and sometimes even chapels. For soldiers stationed there, winter survival depended not on improvisation, but on discipline, design, and sheer numbers. A curious tidbit emerges from journals of enlisted men. Many forts had walls chinked not only with clay, but with horsehair and ashes, a strange mixture thought to keep drafts from seeping through. The men joked that the horses stood guard twice, once in life, and again in the very walls themselves. Imagine pressing your hand against a timber log, knowing strands of mane and tail were woven into the mud, sealing its cracks. Step inside the barracks in your imagination. Rows of bunks stretched down the length of the room, straw mattresses stuffed into rough wooden frames. The smell is heavy. Smoke, sweat, damp wool, and boiled coffee. Boots line the wall, crusted with snow, while coats hang in uneven rows. At one end, a stove glows faintly, its iron surface radiating heat that barely reaches the furthest bunks. You sit on the edge of a straw mattress, quilt drawn around your shoulders, and hear the low murmur of men talking, coughing, snoring. The air is thick, almost oppressive. Yet it is warmer than the outside. You run your hand along the wall and feel the rough grain of logs, sticky with resin in some spots, slick with frost in others. The chinking holds, but drafts slip through, making the lantern flames waver. Every sound amplifies, the crackle of fire, the scrape of boots on the floor, the clink of tin mugs. In the stillness between, you hear the wind pressing against the fort walls, trying in vain to claw its way in. The fort is more than shelter, it is order. Guards pace along the walls, their footsteps echoing above. Drums beat faintly at dawn, calling men to duty. Even in the depths of winter, routines are kept. Drills in the snow, repairs to palisades, watch rotations through icy nights. You imagine standing atop the wall, snowflakes stinging your cheeks as you scan the empty plain. The horizon stretches white and endless. But inside the fort, structure holds chaos at bay. Meals are communal, eaten in long mess halls where smoke gathers near the ceiling beams. The taste of salted pork, beans, and hardtack fills your mouth, bland yet sustaining. Coffee boils constantly, its bitter scent clinging to every corner. Men trade stories between mouthfuls, their voices echoing in the wooden chamber. Sometimes laughter erupts, sometimes silence settles heavy, but always the fire burns, and always the food comes on time. That reliability feels like a luxury in this land of improvisation. At night, the fort grows quieter, the gates creak closed, torches flicker, and the world outside seems to vanish. In your bunk, you hear the muffled howl of wolves, distant and eerie. But it does not pierce the fort's defenses. You pull the quilt tighter, the straw crunching beneath you, and close your eyes with a rare sense of safety. Whatever else the fort may lack, it offers protection, and that alone lets you rest. Yet the fort also carries an undertone of unease. Illness thrives here in winter. The air grows stale, coughs spread like wildfire. The close quarters that bring warmth also breed fevers. You imagine lying awake, listening to the labored breathing of your neighbor, wondering if you will fall ill by morning. Survival here is not only about cold, but about the invisible threats that linger in shared air. The texture of fort life seeps into your senses. The feel of rough wool blankets scratching your skin. The sound of boots stomping snow off at the door. The sight of frost creeping across the inside of window panes. Delicate as lace. The smell of tallow candles burning low, mingled with wood smoke. It is both claustrophobic and strangely comforting, a paradox that defines every winter behind the palisade. Still, there is camaraderie here that softer homes cannot replicate. Men sing quietly in the evenings, their voices blending with the crackle of stoves. A fiddler plays a tune, bows scratching against strings, and boots tap along in rhythm. You picture yourself leaning back, eyes half closed, lulled by the hum of voices and the warmth of company. The fort may be harsh, but it holds life within its walls. And that life is enough to make winter survivable. When spring finally comes, the snow melts from the palisades. The gates swing wider, and the fort breathes easier. But for now, in the dead of winter, you lie wrapped in the disciplined comfort of barracks. And knowing the walls stand strong, the fires burn steady, and the routine carries you forward. One day at a time, you close your eyes, the drums are silent, the guards pace above, the stove hums faintly. Beyond the walls, the cold rages on. But here, within timber and stone, you are cocooned in the order of survival. And now, dear listener, as the fort fades softly in your mind, and all the shelters of the Wild West drift like snowflakes into memory, it is time to rest. The soddy, the log cabin, the canvas tent, the stone hearth, the buffalo hide, the adobe walls, the dugout, the shanty, the fort. All of them have told their quiet stories. All of them have shown you how people endured, how they carved warmth from wilderness, how they refused to let winter win. But now, let all of that settle gently. Like dust after a long journey, let the images blur and soften. Let the sounds fade into silence. You have walked through the long, cold nights of the frontier, and now you deserve your own shelter, your own warmth, your own peace. Imagine yourself in the warmest of all those places, where the fire glows steady, where quilts are piled high, where the walls, however they were made, hold firm. Outside, the storm still rages, but it is distant now, muffled, harmless. Inside, there is only comfort, only safety, only the slow, deep rhythm of rest. Your breath grows slower, deeper, each exhale releasing the cold, each inhale gathering warmth. The prairie fades, the settlers' struggles drift away, and what remains is only calm, the assurance that even the harshest winters can be endured, that shelter, in whatever form, is enough, that you are safe. So let yourself drift now, gently, softly. Picture the lantern's glow dimming, quilts wrapping tighter, the storm far, far away. You are warm, you are safe, and the night will carry you smoothly into dreams. Sweet dreams, dear listener, sweet dreams.